Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Gunn, and I'm a researcher with the RSA's Research and Learning Directorate, and lead researcher on the work we're going to be talking about today. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all to the RSA for tonight's event. To coincide with the launch of our report, Make It Authentic, you should have, I think, some QR codes. Please do download it and have a read if you haven't already. A warm welcome as well to everyone who's joining us online. It's great to have you with us, and you can get involved in the conversation by posting your questions in the chat or on Twitter using the hashtag RSAYouth. Later in this session, we'll be able to put your comments to our fantastic panel, each of whom have played a part in making this work possible. Today we've got Dr. Ali Boddy, who's Senior Lecturer in Philanthropic Studies at the University of Kent, and who leads a major piece of work into youth social action in primary schools as we speak. We've got Lisa Seddon as well, who's Deputy Head Teacher at Prescott Primary School in Merseyside and was one of our case study schools. And then finally we've got Holly Notka, who's Head of Partnerships and Impact with iwill movement, who of course are so instrumental in youth social action too. Before that, I'll introduce you to some of the key points from the report. I realise that you might not have had time to necessarily have a look. And we'll also have a chance to hear from some of the pupils from our case study schools too. So I'm very happy to say that Lisa and Emily, wherever she is, they very rapidly put together some videos of their pupils. So we'll get to hear from them and some of their projects. So less than a year ago, the RSA launched a new mission called Design for Life, which aims to support people, places, and planet to flourish. And our youth social action work really kind of predates this mission, but actually active citizenship remains a key part of the RSA's ethos and is fundamental to the idea that a better world is possible and that it's in the hands of everyone in order to build it. Many of us in the room will know the effects that engaging in youth social action has on young people, the positive effects, the citizenship skills they develop, the knowledge they gain about their community and the wider world, and the sense of agency engaging in civic activism and kind of fosters. We also know that communities benefit from having pupils who are participating in making their local areas better places to live, campaigning on important issues, and bringing a level of creativity and enthusiasm that comes with being curious young learners. Together, this benefit to pupils and communities has been called the double benefit of youth social action. The genesis of the present work that we've been doing in primary schools is rooted in a question around how participating in youth social action might also impact on teachers as well. And the idea that they might experience what originally we were calling a third benefit. This is what my predecessor Hannah Breeze kind of was calling it, a potential third benefit to teachers. But I think one question that I've heard a few times is like, why should we care necessarily about teacher experience? And I think it's a legitimate one, but I think our work has kind of shown that it is really important. We know from previous work that we've done at the RSA, our Citizens of Now report, that educators are the catalyst for youth social action in primary schools. They're often at the heart of doing this and driving this stuff. They're the ones who can facilitate safe spaces for pupils to be able to actually do this. And without teachers, a lot of the opportunities from this stuff just wouldn't be available. And I think this is really clear in the report. Like, if without teachers driving this stuff forward, there wouldn't be the opportunity for pupils. And I think the other important reason as well is that at the moment teachers are on the front line of a really, really challenging situation when it comes to recruitment, retention, and also well-being and satisfaction. We know that teachers are leaving the profession in droves. We know that it's really hard to recruit teachers. And our own teacher tap results from the survey that we ran for this report show that actually resources are short, money is short. And so offering like co-curricular stuff or extracurricular stuff like that youth social action encompasses is really hard. It's a really, really hard kind of picture out there. So when we set out to do this, we wanted to understand how teachers experience youth social action with a view to like encouraging and enabling more educators to engage with this stuff and to signal to system leaders as well why this is important. I think the major conclusion that we've had is that we should think of the impact of youth social action in terms of a triple benefit to pupils, to communities, and to educators at the same time. It's not that each of these different parties are kind of affected differently. Actually, all of the things that kind of bind them together are really important. The partnerships that are made, the way that they engage in community, the skills that they build, and the problem solving and that kind of thing that youth social action can foster actually kind of creeps through into all of these areas. In setting up this research, Hannah, who started this off, and then me and kind of the education team at the RSA, wanted to be able to show to centre school experience first and foremost, because I think it's really important we get that kind of you know, ground's eye view of what's going on. So the core of the report is a series of case studies that are a product of extensive qualitative research with both teachers and pupils. And we really kind of did some deep dives with each of the teachers. We visited the schools and we found out the amazing work that they were doing and how they were doing it, most importantly. And that's one thing that I've really wanted to be able to kind of shout about, I think, in the report. So by starting with educator experience and with educator expertise, teachers are the experts in this stuff. You know, we're just drawing this together, we're kind of highlighting it. We've been able to show the elements that need to be in place for youth social action to take root, and it can take root in many different forms. And I think if you see the case studies, you'll see how that varies. Schools are taking their own initiative in building a learning and participatory experience that has a clear thread of social justice running through it, even in really difficult times. And we'll maybe get a little bit more into kind of some of the difficulties that brings up, I think, in terms of the rationale for doing youth social action and kind of how we do that with young people in quite diverse neighbourhoods and communities. So as I say, we'll touch on some of these learnings in the panel, but I wanted to emphasise that schools are doing a lot at the moment, and our case study schools, I think, are a case in point in that. Often without knowing it as well. So I think the other thing as well is that youth social action, I think, as a word, as a term, it can seem intimidating. It can seem like you've got to kind of scale it immediately. You've got to do something that's really kind of impactful and really big. But it isn't a case of everything or nothing, and that actually starting small is actually a legitimate way of building in this stuff, of building in participation, of building in kind of action in the community and doing some of this stuff. And the case studies highlight practice that's going on everywhere already. And I think in many cases, for many schools, it might be a case of just kind of realizing actually what are we doing already that we can potentially kind of shout about. I'll shut up in a minute and we'll hear from some pupils, but I also just wanted to talk a little bit so Lisa, who's on our panel in the middle here, all of our teachers were really quotable. The report was full of quotes from teachers, and I wanted to make sure that their voice was like at the forefront of it, so directly quoting where possible. But something that Lisa said stuck with me, and she just said make it authentic at one point, you know, when they were doing a youth social action project. I think this was writing to an MP or something, and you were kind of, or maybe, yeah. And you said, make it authentic. And for me, I think that kind of gets to the heart of a lot of this and why it's important. Because I think it's easy to say, make it relevant. Like, if you make it relevant for someone, it might be irrelevant for someone else. Whereas actually, where you make it authentic, you make it meaningful, whether that's in learning or kind of a participatory space. And I think that's so important and should be at the core of kind of any youth social action. But I just wanted to big up, essentially, Lisa for that title, for doing a great job. So I'm going to be quiet now. I've missed out a bunch of slides. We're just going to skip over them. Oh no, actually we're not, because this is Prescott School. This is their most recent project that they're running. This is a preview. Is this happening tomorrow?
This is happening all week.
Happening all week. So like you're privy to the amazing work that they're doing around. What is it, Lisa? Again, it's around.
They were given the vote this year. So
that's right.
The school voted to stop illegal wine, to campaign against illegal wine.
Illegal wine, yeah.
In different ways
across the.
So year 3 are looking at being a fin fighter, so the sharks and
losing their fins. So that's sort of one aspect of it.
Great. And we'll hear from them in a second. Yeah, it's immoral to trade coral, folks. Cool. Okay. Yeah, again, these were the 8 learnings. Forgot about these, but that's fine. We can talk about them later. What we'll do now is hear, I think, first from St Bernard's. St Bernard's went to Chester Zoo, is that right, Emily, last week, and to do some of the work that they've been, that they've been doing for a few years. So we'll hear a few bits from the pupils.
We are from St Bernard's Primary School in Ellesmere Port, and we like to make a difference in the world.
Last week we went to Chester Zoo, and we were getting people to make plastic pledges, making speeches about plastic and how it's affecting our beautiful wildlife.
Facts about plastic. You won't believe these numbers.
At least 14 million tonnes of plastic end up in the ocean every year.
We're feeling quite good because we're encouraging people to stop using single-use plastic.
Today we went picking to try and clean up all the rubbish from the environment around our school.
Yeah, what I was going to say is there was supposed to be music, but we had some last minute issues with the music. But you can see the amazing work that they've been doing in their school. Okay, so that's what St Bernard's have been up to. So let's move over to Prescott.
What does it mean to be a global citizen?
That you're a part of this planet, and you need to take care of all of the stuff we need to take care of, and you need to take care of the wildlife especially.
What does it mean to be a global citizen?
Just to save all the animals. It's important to save them because people are taking the scales. Stop it! This is our family.
There we go. Round of applause for St Bernard's and Prescott pupils, I think. Thanks so much again to Lisa and Emily for doing that very much a last minute, in very much a last minute kind of fashion. I think you did a great job, and it's nice to kind of be able to celebrate the work that they've been doing. Yeah, we're moving over to have a discussion about various aspects of the report, and hopefully we might kind of open things up and think a little bit more about kind of the wider picture, I guess, in education and kind of learning and participation in schools today. But I think first what we'll do is maybe go through, starting with you, Ali, and think about kind of why it's important to have this conversation today, and I guess what maybe most resonated with you in the report.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me here. I think in terms of what resonated the most in the report, I think it's really difficult just to pick out one thing. I think there was a lot that resonates with our large-scale research that's going on across England at the moment, and I think there's a lot to celebrate. I think we see that teachers are really positive about social action, are really positive about active citizenship, and we too see a positive reciprocal relationship between both kind of the engagement in active citizenship, but also teachers' own well-being within the classroom. And we're starting to be able to see links to this around recruitment and retention. I also think what resonated was the idea of the journey as well, and actually that all schools are at very different parts of the journey, and I think that equally needs to be celebrated as well, even if you're at the start of that journey in terms of how we move forwards. And the other part, I suppose, which really resonated was how social action looks very different in very different schools and in very different contexts. And different schools across the country are facing very different challenges. And actually, there is not one size fits all to this conversation, but I think that brings us on to kind of why this conversation is so important right now. And for me, and certainly through our research that we've seen, is there's just no doubt about it. We're facing unprecedented challenges at the moment, and our children and young people are growing up in a really difficult and different world at the moment in terms of having to face things such as climate change. We're seeing growing levels of poverty. We're seeing huge arguments and debates around diversity, representation and identity. And actually, it brings us back to the question of, well, what is the purpose of education? And we asked 100 teachers this question: why do you get up every day and do what you do? Not one of them said, because we want our kids to have good SATs results. Not one of them came back with those answers. It was all about the citizenship. It was, we want our children and young people to be the best versions of themselves. And so actually, I think this conversation fits into a lot of wide debates that we're having at the moment about what is the central purpose of education. And so I think it's just so important that we bring this debate to the fore.
Great. Thanks, Ali. And yeah, Lisa, for you, like, obviously you're on kind of the grounds, like you're on the front line leading this kind of stuff. Why is it important? And kind of, yeah, you were part of the report. Like,
well,
so what resonated
I was just going to say,
yeah.
for me, it was quite a personal journey for me, because we were involved from the start, and I came and met all of those other wonderful schools. I don't know if anyone's here today, but we sat around that table in December and sort of just talked about it, really, about what all of those other schools, great activities that were going on, and it kind of made me feel validated, made us as a school feel more validated that we'd taken the path, probably before we knew we were taking the path. Because you're right, it is quite a complex, somebody said before, it's quite a complex youth social action kind of, you know, I'm sure a lot of teachers don't think that that's what they're doing when that's what they're doing. But we had that discussion in December, and then to see it all on paper, you know, all of those wonderful stories, just, you know, it's a very powerful document, isn't it? And I think it made me realise the sort of huge responsibility we've got to carry on doing it, but sharing it, like events that we've got today, you know, to share that message, really. Yeah. So
did you, just to kind of follow, like you said, like kind of come into the workshop, like for you, it was like getting stuff down on the page. Like, do you have time to do that normally, like as a teacher? Like, does that ever happen?
How much time have you got?
Yeah.
No, you don't. And I was really lucky to be invited and to be able to, you know, to be able to get out to do that. I'm part of the SLT, so in a way, we think that's important as a school to do that, and that's important when you're that leadership team to place, you know, to place the. You've got it in your control to follow that path, haven't you? So for us, enabling me to get out to do that was something that we would never have questioned. Yeah. But a lot of schools don't have that capacity, do they? So, you know, it was lucky that we had about, you know, 8 or 9 schools, I don't know, but we were lucky on that day from all over the country to sit there with those, you know, team of professionals talking about something that was really important. I've never had a chance to do before. Yeah. So it illuminated. Yeah. It made me reflect on what we've done, you know, and listen to other people. So, yeah, it's good.
Great. Thank you. And yeah, Holly, I guess same to you then as well, like what resonated and why is this important? And I guess you're coming from like a kind of the partnerships kind of iwill kind of perspective on this.
Yeah, I think the thing that resonated with me most was, and it's perhaps, I don't know if it's like a groundbreaking kind of like finding, but it was just about, you know, how important leadership is in any setting, obviously in a school setting in the report, but in any setting, and how if you can really embed an ethos and a culture in an organisation, in a school, how that can sort of seep into everything, and that can sort of get into the air that you breathe every day. So that's kind of, yeah, like not perhaps a big surprise, but I think it was really great to see that pulled out, because I think even though I don't work in schools, my background is in broader community work, and maybe we've all experienced where there's been a really great person who gets young people involved and gets communities involved, and then they move to a different job, and then it all sort of grinds to a halt and everyone goes back to the sort of the doldrums of the day-to-day. Whereas where it's embedded, where it's kind of in everything that you sort of see and do, then it doesn't matter whether you come and go. That is part of the day-to-day conversations, whether it's a lesson plan or a conversation on the side of the playground. And I think that for me was a really nice sort of, just that clarity about how important that is, and great that it's happening as well.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that kind of was very clear, like, and one of our kind of key learnings, which I quickly skipped over on the slides, was around like kind of how important SLT kind of buy-in is to this, to like make it work. Like all of our schools, it's like been really kind of crucial, I think, to kind of building that culture, and I think we all know like how important like having an open and kind of a culture where you kind of can feel like you can drive this stuff forward and kind of have that agency is really important. So okay, thank you all. I think, Ali, then, like, just for a bit of context, you're working on kind of what is effectively, if we were to kind of able to scale up kind of this work, like you're kind of doing this like across the country, like at a much grander scale. What's the kind of wider picture look like? Can you kind of treat us to some kind of, I know you've got some part of the report out, what's some kind of early findings about like what's going on in schools today and what challenges that they're maybe facing? Like, what are you seeing?
Certainly. So we're just in about 2 years into this research. So to summarise 2 years research in a couple of minutes is going to be a bit challenging. But so please do ask any further questions or if there's any bits that you want to know. And we do also have the first report that is published, which you can access as well. We were both interested in what was happening in schools, so mapping across the country kind of what type of activities, and we were including everything from acts of kindness to giving to charity, social action, community engagement, advocacy, activism, campaigning. And we were also very interested in kind of how this was being framed. So we've used a kind of framework that looks at, are we teaching children within our schools to kind of act in a type of benevolence, i.e. we go and we help out other people in need, but actually that's where that activity stops. And that's not decrying that activity, that's really important within our society, but also where does the angle of kind of justice come in? So actually the example we always use here is the idea of, are we teaching children to give to the food bank, or are we teaching children to give to the food bank while questioning and teaching them to question why food poverty exists and what the systems and structures that sit around that? And so they were the kind of the two angles that we've been looking at. And one of the first kind of main findings is that most schools do some form of active citizenship engagement. Actually, it's very rare that they're not at least engaging in children in need, in comic relief, or doing litter picks or something within their schools. But predominantly, that activity is framed within a framework of benevolence. Actually, the linking to social justice and kind of that critical inquiry and critical thinking is a lot rarer. So we only found it in about a fifth of schools in our first in our first survey. What we also find, though, is there is huge inequality in terms of the access to the type of activities that children get to engage in. So actually, if you are in a deprived area or a deprived community, we used FSM data as a proxy indicator of deprivation. If you're in the bottom quartile with FSM, you are much less likely to be able to engage in things like social action projects, in campaigning, and those kind of more kind of active engagement. And you're much less likely to have that framed around the idea of justice as well. So what we're turning out then is potentially we're preparing certain children from certain backgrounds for that active participation more than others. So for us, this is a concern. So whilst I do really want to celebrate what's happening in a lot of schools, I think we do have to kind of take a wider picture on this. But that isn't also to criticise any of those schools that are in those more deprived areas. Actually, those schools are on kind of a firefighting on so many different levels that actually their time and space to be able to engage in this is a lot less. But then we also had my very clever colleague, Jack, who did all this wonderful quantitative analysis on 2,600 schools for us. And what we found is we couldn't actually explain all of that by deprivation. We couldn't make those direct links. There was something else going on here. So what we started looking at was this idea of the civic school. So that is a school that embraces this culture of active citizenship, where that school leadership's there, where it's a whole kind of, it's embraced in the school values, in the school framework, in the approach. And also the idea of the civic teacher. And it's when we find these two things that come together that we sort of feel like we kind of get the magic space where this active citizenship really happens. But what we've been looking at and where we are in our current data analysis is looking at all the kind of inhibitors and the enablers of that activity within those spaces. So actually we've even found those schools where actually the school doesn't particularly value active citizenship. It's not up there, it's not one of the school priorities. But you've got a teacher who is really civically active and really passionate. And I think I heard a wonderful phrase from one of the teachers talking about this. He said they feel themselves as a choir activist. So actually what they're doing is in their classroom, they're weaving these ideas into all of those different kind of teachable moments in the classroom. But actually they're never going to have the same level of experience as the schools that really embrace this civic culture.
Great, thank you. And so I guess that's a really nice kind of view of kind of the bigger picture. And Lisa, maybe you can give us like the kind of the more on the ground kind of view. Like how did this stuff start at Prescott, and like kind of what was in kind of place to make it work, do you think?
Well, you've just touched on a lot of it there, haven't you? So at primary school, you know, you always join in with the big national events because the children love it. And that was going on for a long time, and something that the school would, you know, value those days. But the reasons why you did that were fluffy, really, and the children took part and put the red nose on or the yellow bear outfit and carried on. But didn't really understand why there was a need, so that justice element of that. But it was ongoing. I mean, it was happening, but that element didn't happen. And then we did go to St Bernard's in 2017 in Ellesmere Port, and looked at their conservation project that they'd done that year, and that was myself and the head went over, and we were just completely blown away by the way that the children could discuss it was the Singing for Songbirds at the time, so it was about the conservation of the songbirds in Indonesia, and they were completely passionate about it. Without adults showing us around, you know, there was no adults to be seen. The children did all of the guiding, and were very proud of their work, and knew exactly why they were doing it, and so on. And they're very close to Chester Zoo, as you've seen. And there was a real partnership there that we took away that element of the children. It's having a real impact to how the children see their own value in that community, and the fact that the songbirds were thousands of miles away in Indonesia didn't matter, because, you know, they knew that just their voices were making a difference, and their role as educators as well. So we came back and thought, right, we've got, you know, we're not close to the zoo particularly, but we had our own way of doing it, and so worked with St Bernard's really that year quite closely, and made that come to Prescott, really. I think we even had a little baton and did a bit of an assembly, and St Bernard's came to us and we handed a songbird over, not a real one. And the children thought it was amazing that this had been, you know, passed on. So that, I would say that was the moment when things started to change in terms of that whole acting for change, becoming custodians of this planet, you know, the bigger reasons why we need to use our voices, you know, and let the children speak up, really. I think that's when time started to shift for us, yeah.
Great, and I think like one of the things that I liked about Prescott, and this is I think true of all the schools, is like those connections between the schools and between, you know, partners, I guess, essentially, like is so kind of crucial to kind of getting this stuff going. And obviously, Holly, you kind of come from it from a you know, from a kind of a third party, I guess, kind of point of view. Like what role can kind of organisations like iwill like kind of play in like kind of helping and supporting schools to kind of potentially, you know, foster some of this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, So as the I Will movement, we're really all about kind of trying to encourage youth social action to happen everywhere with every young person. But it's also about communities and it's also about places. So youth social action is ultimately about making change, and really, ultimately, we want to be addressing the big problems in society, the inequalities, structurally and systemically. So that can't be just children and teachers and parents. It can't just be on their laps just because they're the ones with that close proximity on a day-to-day level. And there's loads that they can do, but there absolutely is a huge role for everyone to play. I think I'd go as far as saying that. I mean, I think when we're talking about change and we're talking about youth social action leading change and young people leading change, we're also talking about power. And really then we have to look at who's got the power and how is that being shared, how is that being given up. And so I think one of the things that we try and do at I Will is spotlight good examples at kind of hyper-local levels, areas and initiatives that wouldn't perhaps otherwise be seen beyond the postcode almost. And sort of amplify that, turn the volume up on that and try and make sure that other people are seeing that. So I guess to make sure young people from communities see themselves represented. So I live in Great Yarmouth in Norfolk. It's a seaside town with loads of statistics that are all flashing red and everyone says how awful we are and all those sorts of things. But actually when a young person that comes from quite a poor and challenged seaside town sees another person from a similar kind of demographic doing something that's making a little bit of change, how impactful that is. So that's always my reference point. So yeah, our job is to do that, but it's also about kind of putting the spotlight on the organisations and institutions that work with schools and youth organisations to really enable that youth social action, to kind of validate it and to kind of clear the road for it a little bit as well. And so for us, a place-based approach, and it's a little bit jargonistic, but that's absolutely the kind of vehicle for creating change, with youth social action being the catalyst for those changes in places. And I think the key thing there is that young people don't necessarily think in the lanes that we do, that we're kind of almost forced to when we go into the world of work. I'm in health or I'm in education. They have a much more holistic view in the world naturally. And so I think the things that they see and the things that they're able to tell and the stories that they're able to share with us are much more likely to be intersectional and bring in new insights that, I don't know, the commissioners at the local health body might not necessarily have thought of before. So that kind of place-based approach is key for us around how schools can be the centre of kind of places, and they are, but how those other institutions and organisations have to be walking alongside schools to support to make that change, because no one can do it on their own.
Yeah, and I guess that leads nicely then to, I had a question around kind of like the systems that do need to be in place, and we had a chat about that, didn't we? I think in the workshop, Lisa, like kind of, and Emily and Sean as well, about this last November, like, what is missing and what needs to be there to enable kind of our young people to have these opportunities, what do we need to see, really, to kind of change? Ali, do you want to kind of go first? Sorry, I'm looking at you, so it's you first.
Time.
Okay.
I think the biggest barrier that we see within schools and when we talk to teachers, as I say, 100% of the teachers we spoke to and through our surveys were really passionate about this activity, but time and resources were in the schools were these huge barriers. I also think that we have to think about this on kind of the wider scale as well. And I'm sorry, I feel like we're listening to these wonderful celebratory stories and I'm kind of keep waving a flag going, but...
I agree, by the way.
But where we saw, for example, some amazing civic schools, some amazing civic leaders, how this got applied within areas is where schools were in areas of huge deprivation and their civicness is being applied in terms of providing food banks. Their civicness is being applied in terms of doing warm banks, for clothing banks for their local community. And this is where that active citizenship is taking place. for children and young people in these kind of most deprived areas. I mean, we spoke to schools who are actively fundraising so they can reduce mould and pests within the social housing that their children are living in, because that's what's inhibiting their education. So actually, if we really want to talk about the systems and structures, we need to think about the communities that the schools live in. This cannot all be on schools. I absolutely agree with Holly's point. And we've seen the systemic kind of reduction of early intervention services, community support services, mental health support, youth services have been decimated. They're all used to kind of sit around this space. So actually, if we really value this stuff, then actually we need to be thinking about support services that sit around schools and around the communities to help kind of enable this. But I will come back to one of Holly's points on a more positive one as well, is that we do see, what we saw was a really positive relationship between when schools engaged with civil society organisations and worked in partnership. We saw really kind of positive active citizenship taking place within those schools as well. So again, those kind of partnerships I think are really important.
Yeah, so Lisa.
Yeah, so I would say that, you know, the global view, and what we try to teach our children is the fact that if you are a global citizen, then you do link issues that are going on in your community, and you can look at them worldwide, or you can look at them what's going on close by, and they're getting much more used to seeing things that are on their doorstep now. And actually, you know, that's a big impact for us, because the things that they may have overlooked at one point in time, through doing things. You know, this is a conservation project, but if we look at things that we teach our children, involve them in across the year, you know, we look at rebel heroes, and it's not just about that, it's actually about the view that they have of each other in school. The school community, I think, is important first. So we've got 430 children in our school, all from different families, all with, you know, different abilities, all with, you know, differences to celebrate. And we encourage them to talk about that. You know, we have guest speakers in our assemblies that talk about they might be asthmatic, or they might have cystic fibrosis. And you know, and you get a little year 2 child stood up in front of the whole, talking about what medication he takes and feeling like Superman. He said he felt like Superman when he walked out. Now, they feel empowered, whether it's through that once a year, which is really important, but the day-to-day ethos, you talked about ethos, which I think is absolutely what it comes down to, isn't it? It's that empowerment of our children to realise that their voices count, and that you know, they can lead the way, because, like you say, they have a different view on life, don't they? So we're beginning to let the reins go a little bit and go, yeah, you can do that if you want to do. We're here, and we're here to support you, but you've got to be brave to let them do that, because actually you don't know what the outcome is sometimes, do you? So, but I do think that they're beginning to see the injustice in the world, and I do think it is local, and it is relevant, and it is something that hopefully, you know, they might not go and be on a shark trawler and maybe be at the forefront of that campaign when they're old, but they might. But hopefully they will make a difference to their community, because they kind of know how to do it now, and, you know, they're valued to do it. So.
Holly, did you want to go talk a bit more? You've kind of touched upon like the systems that need, like, is there anything else? We kind of, you know, partnership organisations, like, and kind of building those links is important, but like, is there kind of wider structural stuff that you think, like, could the government be doing more? Is there like anything like in maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think with social change, I read something a couple of months ago. I'm not a massive reader, but every now and then I find something and I sort of like burrow into it. And it was all about complexity, and how social problems exist in like this big complexity, this big mess, this big sort of bowl of spaghetti is kind of how I've been describing it. And it made me think about social action, and then reading this report made me think about social action in schools, and how, you know, how we need to make sure that we kind of own the fact that we're operating in complexity, so that we know it's not about, like, you know, getting some money from the government to install a big project and, you know, big shiny new building or some new resources, and cross our fingers and hope that that's going to be the thing that changes the inequalities and all the other challenges that we're experiencing, because it's not. There's 1,000,001 different contributors to a social problem, and so, the kind of the myth, I think, that sometimes comes from governments, that we will do this, this and this to level you up, or whatever political kind of narrative is used, is, I think, just a bit, you know, I think, you know, we need to own the fact that it's really, really complex. And I think when we're operating in that sort of space, knowing that it's going to take lots and lots of different things, and we won't know what they are necessarily. We'll have a good steer and a good feel, and we can kind of follow our nose, and young people will tell us the things that matter. But we have to be okay with the fact that we might not know what the activity is or what the outcome might be, but that nonetheless we will be inching forward. And so it's almost a probing and listening and trying and tripping over and trying again, listening, experimenting, and each time learning a little bit. We might zigzag, but we will kind of, if we've got a sort of a general destination, then we will get there. So I think that's really important. And someone said to me the other day, I wrote it down because it hasn't left my head, about social change. They said, what if the next big thing is actually lots of little things? And that really kind of struck me, because I was like, yes, that is, you know, sometimes in this work you think, oh, is this work really making a difference? You have a sort of days where you sort of wobble about it. But that really kind of spoke to me. And I shared it at an event that was being led by a network of schools actually in Suffolk. And 2 teachers fed back afterwards saying that statement had really validated their practice, because sometimes they weren't sure what they were doing in schools was enough. And I think one of them shared an experience where they had been given that autonomy in the school. Their authorising environment was like, yeah, go for it, whatever you think. And in year 4, I think it started out with litter picks and the things that young people were seeing and quite tangibly taking action on. But by continuously having those conversations over, by the time they got to year 6, I think it was, those young people were challenging the school about the processes around unauthorised absences when it came to Eid, and how that was being communicated to parents. And so there were these unauthorised absences because the communications weren't clear. And so what you had 2 years ago was litter picking, which is brilliant. But 2 years on, through all of those little things, you actually had those children essentially,
taking action.
Making structural change within that system. And that was quite kind of a goosebump moment, really, just to hear that.
True. Yeah, it does happen like that. I would say that in year 6, that starts happening now, and it is. It's good. It's great to see. It doesn't make you go, that's what we wanted. Great.
Yeah, just because I do think this kind of comes back to that argument about kind of making it authentic, and certainly something we've seen through our research and previous studies that we've done directly with children as well, in terms of that. I think it's very easy for us to fall into an idea of kind of saying that there's a kind of hierarchy of action. So actually giving to charity is at the bottom of that hierarchy, and protest is potentially at the top of that hierarchy. And actually I think it's about thinking about what the most appropriate response in a certain situation is. So, for example, the wildfires a few years ago in Australia, my children were really moved by that. There was no way they were going to go out to Australia and help fight those wildfires. Their most appropriate response at that point was fundraising. And so actually that was their way of engaging in that. And I think it's really important that we kind of keep that actually it can be the smallest of acts or it can be the largest of acts, but it's all about supporting that journey, and that school should be a place where we get to practice our civicness, and we get to make mistakes as well in a really kind of safe space. And I think we've always seen that as being really important when I kind of talk about this conceptualisation of the civic school. It kind of embraces that and embraces this as a journey. So in Key Stage 1, using art, using literature to kind of think about some of these issues. As you move into Key Stage 2, starting to kind of put them into action in different ways.
Yeah, great. Thank you all so much. I think we've got maybe 10 minutes for some questions in the room and online. Would anybody in the room, anyone in the room got any questions at all? Yeah, the gentleman there. And yeah, do you want to go?
Cool. Thank you. So as someone that was also an ex-teacher, an ex-school leader, and has like my own company in regards to like developing the cultural and social capital of students, there's often a lot of pushbacks from people outside of the whole education ecosystem. How do you like deal with that? Because I noticed, like, especially with your program, you're dealing with a lot of people from outside the school system. So how do you actually like engage with them and get them to understand the importance of teaching these skills towards your students?
Who are we directing that to?
Who would you like
to answer that one?
I guess all three of you.
So you're thinking about being an external, somebody who wants to work with schools, is that right?
It's more just like, let's say you're trying to convince the parents why it's important to teach their kids this.
Yeah.
But then it's just like the parents will be often just like, well, why are you spending the time teaching the children this? Shouldn't you be teaching them the stuff that's part of the curriculum? Like, how do you convince them that teaching them these skills is actually just as important as teaching them the relevant hard skills?
I understand. So that's a bit of a slow burn, I think, really, and that's not something that's going to happen overnight. But I think for us, it's probably, well, this is our 5th conservation project. Now, they now see it as something that's a unique feature of our school year that, you know, they embrace, and they look forward to finding out what that theme is, and they talk to the children. That, you know, they're quite proactive with that now. But we probably about 2 years ago, we enrolled in the Rights, Respect in School programme, which is the UNICEF programme now. That through you know, the light across everything we do in school, and what we want our children to be when they move from year 6 to year 7, and what is the purpose of us as educators. And that is very much rooted in the community and bringing, you know, educating more widely. And that kind of influences everything. It influences your behaviour policy, it influences how, you know, you let that children's voice be shown in school. And I think, you know, sometimes it does bring questions from the community, but actually I think they see the children behaving in a different way. The children do all the talking for you, really, I would say, because they are, each one is a mini success story for, you know, not being afraid to use their voice and challenge. And I think parents take the lead from the children, parents and carers and families more widely take the lead from the children, really. So, but it doesn't, it is a culture that is grown over time, isn't it? You know, you have to work hard and work hard to explain a lot of it.
Well, I'd agree with you about it being a slow burn and a culture change. And I think things like the I Will campaign has really moved us forwards in terms of secondary education and adolescence really well in that way. I would like to now shine a greater light on what's happening in primary and to start thinking about that this conversation applies there too. But I do think we're also seeing, so we saw I Will with cross-party support, we've now kind of seen the House of Commons launch its Civic Journey project. It's had cross-party support. Now again, that is starting from 11 years old. It's not looking at primary at the moment, but I think we need to kind of bang that drum. So I do think it is a slow burn, but I think it is about changing those narratives. I think it's about combining research and combining lived experiences and the stories and the case studies together to kind of show how powerful and important that this is. But I do think, as you say, we always know culture change is really hard work. But the fact that we've got all of these people sitting in this room and the people online is a really good start and step in that direction as well.
Any more questions from the room at all? Yeah, let's go.
Thanks for sharing. It's really insightful. I got like a big really, can I ask 2 questions? Like, first of all, like actually I did a similar research on citizen education in Hong Kong. And actually we have a similar trend that there's a unequal access to the types of activities. But that doesn't mean like the grassroots students, they don't involve in citizenship education, advocacy. It's more like in Hong Kong, the result shows that they are more involved in online engagement. So I wonder if this is similar, I mean, is observed in the UK, and if so, how can teachers and schools bridge the students, I mean, from the online to like more diversified actions taking place in reality? And second question is, actually, Hong Kong teachers are very experienced in helping schools and students to get involved in youth social actions, and in the past 2 years, thousands of teachers have migrated to UK, and a lot of them are into the UK education sector already, but we find difficulties in like a lot of the schools, they still lack of such culture to do youth like social actions. I wonder, like, what would be your advice for these teachers? How can they start that kind of culture from a bottom-up approach as a teacher? Like, if the schools, they a lack of that culture at the moment, what can teachers do to, like, you know, activate and initiate that kind of culture? Thank you.
Can I start with the second question?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
This is about recruitment. I think, as you know, when I look at our staff currently, the quality of our young staff. I used to think of myself as, you know, one of those. Seems to have passed very quickly. They are. There's a smaller pool of them. So it is about, you know, bringing that creativity, seeking creativity in our trainee teachers, and making sure that we are allowed the freedoms, and that was the bigger question, because, you know, we need to break free from the restraints of that curriculum, or the threat of Ofsted, or, you know, whatever it is that constrains teachers all over the country, time, workload, everything else that's putting people off coming in. We need to tackle that bit. But the sort of, I think our responsibility as a school is to bring the new teachers in, whether they be trainee teachers or as ECTs, you know, to support those in their growth. And to do that in a school like ours is sort of to match what we do with the children, and to, you know, value what they do. So we've got 4 ECTs in school at the moment, and they bring something different to the staff. Really, their kind of view on the world as a 20-something, not as a 50-something, is very valuable and valued by us. And it's supposedly, I suppose, from what I hear them say, it's easier for them to make that difference. I think if you're in a school that, like you're talking about there, that is, you know, that top-down, where there's a certain culture that's embedded, that must be very difficult. I would say that we were talking before about, like, that single teacher who has that ability to make that change, not by being particularly radical, but by the way that they build relationships with their children in their own classroom. That can make a huge, that can spread, can't it? Like, they can make small changes on their own level by looking at the success of their children, and they've got to champion what they do with their children, which will be seen by SLT, and it'll be seen by families, and it'll be, you know, it'll be seen by the teacher next door, and that kind of, they've got to be brave to do that, really. But I agree, it's sort of, it's not an equal footing for a lot of our new teachers, is it? And they need to be trusted to bring I suppose, the modern world in, because we can be a bit staid sometimes.
I think there's something about bridging research and practice a lot more as well. And I don't think we're always fantastic at doing that. So there is a huge amount of academic research out there that both says that active citizenship contributes towards attainment, it contributes towards attendance, it contributes positively towards behaviour. As we're seeing in ours, we see it contribute positively to teacher retention. So there's an argument that we can bring in that fits within those systems and structures of schools that are maybe very much concerned about Ofsted or those other areas. But I do think there's perhaps even more work from people like me who are doing the research on this side to kind of bring those conversations into the primary education sphere. I'll very quickly comment on the online comment, because actually I think you've got an absolutely valid point there. I think there is also something, so we are seeing year on year at the moment, young people are participating less and less in our formal democratic structures. They're voting less, they're volunteering less, they're giving to charity less, all of these kind of civic engagements. But I also think that comes with a huge thing of caution about the how they're engaging, and that actually we formally define these areas, and actually we miss a whole lot of activity that can be taking place, which is quite often taking place as well within those more kind of marginalised communities that we're not recognising in the same way. And so I do think we have to apply apply caution to that. In terms of the kind of engaging online in the primary sphere, I think it's less of a kind of big element than we see in kind of secondary. And it's certainly through our research didn't come up as an area that they're massively concerned about. But I don't know if Holly has any more to sort of on that kind of online activism that we see.
I mean, I think, you know, there's a lot of kind of negativity about, you know, young people on their phones all the time and, you know, burrowing into the sort of these online worlds. But I think there's a huge amount of positive benefits as well that perhaps we don't always immediately see because we might not be operating in the same spaces. So there's caution needs to be applied, and there are obviously sort of spaces that aren't safe. But, you know, young people are probably older than primary, but, you know, they're not daft. They understand internet safety probably more than most of us in this room do, maybe. So, and I think the power of some of the social networking spaces is that, you know, like I mentioned earlier, you can see yourself represented beyond the people who have traditionally been representing you in perhaps, let's say, youth parliament or something. Are doing things that are making a positive impact on communities that you might not have necessarily thought about, or not thought that you could do it because, you know, you don't necessarily, I don't know, see yourself in that space. So I think there's a huge thing around that digital online space being quite critical for representation and the things that you, you wouldn't necessarily see yourself doing until you saw someone that looked like you. But I think there's also some really interesting social action that can happen online that I think it was in a research paper actually. It was a young person whose social action was challenging the trolls on a local newspaper Facebook thread or whatever, and people saying, oh, it's all the foreigners, or, you know, really, really horrible things that people were trolling. And her social action was saying, well, hang on a second, you know, responding with facts and, you know, very calmly but quite clearly responding. And I love that as an example, because I think sometimes we can romanticise social action a little bit as being going out there and being a governor or a trustee or doing something very kind of obvious and practical. But actually, you know, those online spaces can be pretty grim, and there's young people out there, there's people out there generally, but young people too, who are continually, with huge kind of emotional expense as well, chipping away at people who are, you know, trying to harm others, and that, you know, I felt for her, but I love that as well.
Okay, folks, we're nearly at time. Thank you so much for the questions, and thank you to everyone in the room. I think a round of applause for our panellists. Thanks again to everyone who's joined both online and in the room. I think that was a really productive conversation. I think really interesting to get kind of different perspectives from all kind of coming from all angles in this. Please do read the report if you haven't done already. And if you're a fellow, you can continue the conversation on Circle and we'll be engaging. Thanks again to the iwill Pears Fund for making this work possible. And also just a huge thank you to our panel and also all of the participant schools, participant pupils who took part in this. Thanks everyone and good night.